welcome back to my coverage of HeroCon. We're now into round 2, where we'll be playing Acquisition against Toha. As a reminder, I'm playing Hassassin Bahram for this event, as suggested/requested by the community, trying out both an InfoWar-based Hassassin Bahram list and kind of a meme defensive ARO hellscape Hassassin Bahram list. As noted in the prior video, I would end up playing the InfoWar list in all 3 rounds, but this was the round that demonstrated why I should have had a second list that wasn't built to be a Sundukbut meme, and was built to be something else instead. Let's just revisit the lists briefly. So, this is the list that I played this game, and would play the entire event, and it is built around being basically a well-rounded Hassassin Bahram list using Matawiya for defense, and InfoWar to establish kind of an InfoWar superiority. Against Toha, this would be entirely wasted. Toha take no killer hackers, very few hackers, there would be no targets for the Bereed KHD, all of the hacking, if any, would be done by Pandora, making those KHD Bereeds into basically very expensive, worse versions of Forward Observer Bereeds. If I had had a list that cut Pandora and had 2 hacker Bereeds instead, maybe I could fit some kind of MSV element, perhaps a Boktar. There are a few things that I could potentially have done, even just chain of command on a Hassassin Farzan to let me be more aggressive with the Asawira. I would have chosen to take that in this list, in this matchup instead, and frankly had better hacking as a result. I didn't, wasn't the end of the world, but it was a bit of a use case in, like test case in, yes, okay, this is an InfoWar list, it should pair with a list that can be played in missions where you do not need as much InfoWar. In particular, I chose not to play my second list, which is this, with the Boktar and 2 Nadirs. This is a real maybe list against Toha, and specifically it's a maybe list because symbiomates make revealing nadirs much less efficient than you might like. My opponents are quite good at being disciplined, not giving impact attacks against link teams that are moving, and although maybe I would get a pick against a Mukhtar or something, and maybe the Mimetism would save the nadir, you don't get to just like blow out something that's moving forward as the tip of a spear. Burst 6 in ARO does not necessarily matter that much when you're shooting a Mimetism -3 Symbiomate HMG Sukhel, for example. The Symbiomate will trigger, it will be armor 9, total immunity against the entire volley. You might actually still kill it. It's only got 2 wounds, and if you catch it out of cover, you can feasibly kill it with those things. But I wasn't quite game to try something totally untested, particularly since my Toha opponent in this game is really, really good. He's a common opponent of mine, I've played him many times, and he's a real ace with Toha. This is the list that he used. So, as a reminder, this event we are playing Unmasking, Acquisition, and a variation of Mind Wipe, and this is the list that he built for all 3 of those. He likes playing one list when he can, it's easier to get practice with, and I quite like this as a list. There are 2 main fire teams, Sukhil Kelta, Sukhil Sakil McCall, so a pair of decent Mimetism shooters. Combat Group 2, the Nickel rounds out the guns, with Jan Star and a no-mine Liberatos because he's got too much SWC and other stuff. He's actually running, I think, 3 unlinked McCalls, or maybe they try it up. I could have the combat groups a little bit wrong here. But there are multiple unlinked McCalls in this list, and by the by, that's fine. Have you looked at McCall? It's really good. You can totally just run them Impetuous. Free smoke, that's amazing. He is using the cheap +1 order unlinked tack wheel, although it will jump into a link later in the game, basically acting as a refill. But what you can do with the +1 order tack wheel is you can use it up with its own lieutenant orders, you can move it up in a link and then split it to get 2 free orders to make Ferroware attacks or to use Mirror Ball. Jan Star, obviously a bit of a hero in Toha, and then a Diplomatic Delegate and a Nickel. Now the Nickel would be really good on this table, and you'll see why in a moment, but the only real like wildcard, like fascinating wildcard in this list is the Gout Tarsos. Now, the Gout Tarsos has a boarding shotgun and decharges, and makes quite a lot of sense in actually all 3 of these scenarios. I hate that it only lands on a 12. You're kind of really at the discrepancy of the dice there. But if it lands in all of those scenarios, it has decharges for Mind Wipe. It can make a last turn run with a robust boarding shotgun platform in Acquisition. And in Unmasking, it just runs on and kills HVTs. Or you can use it as a 2 wound close assault piece at a pretty reasonable price point. So it's a very cool and interesting piece. I do think that it tipped my opponent's hand in this game, in the sense of I was actually expecting a Clipsos. I was expecting an acquisition. The old Clipsos reveals and presses the button for a 3-point swing on the last turn. I wasn't expecting a Gautarsos. It makes sense in context of the other two missions, but it meant that when my opponent crit the lieutenant roll, he actually was having a really hard time deciding whether to go first or not. Now, he's playing Toha, he has Janstar, but he has one fewer troops on the battlefield to start with, and he has no counterintelligence. I'm playing Hassassins. I will probably have at least one, maybe two Fidei, but Toha are pretty good at defending against Fidei. Like, look how many flamethrowers there are in this list, and shotguns. Like, everything just about has a template weapon. If it doesn't have a template weapon, it probably has a symbiote mate. If it doesn't have either, it probably has a symbiote bomb. This is a hard list to scalpel anything out with using Fideis. You will probably trade the Fideis at best for something like a Burst 2 McCall flamethrower. On top of that, he's got this Gautarsos. He has a turn 3 play that he kind of wants to make. So he chooses deployment. And I mean, I'm kind of happy with that because it means I don't have to triage Janstar. And he's not sure. I like going first in acquisition personally. I think it's a 16-inch deployment zone scenario where you have more orders than usual because of the bike. Oh, that's what I'm missing. There's a bike in this list somewhere. It's what I've got wrong. I have no idea what I've gotten wrong, but there should be a bike somewhere in this list. I'll figure it out afterwards. Anyway, he chooses to give me deployment. So he chooses deployment advantage, and of course I can't give him deployment and first turn, so I pick first. So this is the table, and this is a really hard deployment zone to deploy in. The 16-inch deployment zones help, but they don't help that much. I actually like the table both aesthetically and functionally. It has this sort of like high ground situation with these buildings here. All of the rooftops are really accessible through ladders. And then you have this low ground kind of like, it's meant to be kind of a maze of shipping crates. And it kind of is, except that I think when they set this table up, they assumed that people wouldn't be deploying on the crates that much. The crates all have ladders on them. They're also easy to vault up, like there and there, for example. But anyone on the crates would be really vulnerable to being shot from up here, and this bridge top. Problem is, my opponent had a Nickel, which does not care about that, and so the Nickel would end up deploying down there and having a commanding view for much of the game. Now, what I chose to do this game is, because I expected a Nickel somewhere at some point, or at least I feared it, I placed both of my Hassassin Fideis during my normal deployment. I didn't roll for them, they just went on the 16-inch line, one went here, and one went here. The idea was to really force my opponent's hand in terms of easy spots to deploy pieces. So he still had kind of this space back here, but I would be able to advance past that space if I needed to. And it's hard to gauge how effectively this works, but my opponent tells me afterwards that it was a real pain in the ass for him. So I would deploy the Asawira Farid Ghulam Dr. Link is here. I'm pretty antsy about the Asawira being this far forward, but I can't really find any of the good spots for it, and it's covered by a Ghazi Matalia. In every game, by the way, I would have a Ghazi Matalia dedicated to protecting that guy. Pandora's back here in the center. The other Ghazi Matalia jammer is here. And then I've got Ghazi Matalia, Red Fury, and multi-sniper rifle, free bounty hunter. Tariq reserve drops here, McMurrah reserve drops here once I know where his Nicole is, and then the rest of the core link is kind of like spread out in this space here. It's messy, and something's going to have to move on the first turn or risk a counterattack, but it's kind of okay. The guided missile remote is hanging out back there. For my opponent's part, he drops a standing diplomatic delegate to try and stop this first Hassassin Fidei, and then he's got kind of like unlinked McCalls and a biker scattered around back here. Another biker back there. We've got, I think, +2 armor on this one and mimetism 6 on this one. And the Nickel deploys on a crate back there. So it's got a nice line down here and some decent lines down into the midfield, although it's not totally commanding. The Libertos hangs out down there, ready to stop McMurrah, or hoping to stop McMurrah. I think the Libertos is the reserve drop, actually. And then the K1 sniper rifles have got some shots from there to there. Now, one deployment zone mistake my opponent makes, and you can barely see it in this photo, is that there are a pair of Kael'tars linked the sniper, and they're on the ground level. Now, I don't know exactly why my opponent did this, because they would end up being able to be shot from this rooftop. But I guess he felt that they were safe and also had templates. And it was sort of like, it was a bit of a risk. The lieutenant is way back there behind a crate, obviously just trying to stay away from Hassassin for days. So here is a closer shot of my Link team and Tariq deployment. You can also see my HVT there. And here is how my Asawira and Doctor are deployed. Jan's star comes down as, I think, my opponent's reserve, but fails the roll. It actually tries to jump the guided missile bot, which I think I would probably have been fine with. I'd have to pull back to deal with him, but it's not a, it wouldn't be a Symbiomate Jam star. So it just pops down there. It'll die at some point during the game. And here we can see the lines of fire that the Nikul has. So it's got quite a lot of visibility kind of into this space here that I would have to play through for much of the game. This is the tack wheel lieutenant, and then we've got like unlinked McCalls and linked McCalls. So 2 unlinked McCalls and 1 linked McCall. This is a Spitfire Sukael, and this is a Forward Observer Sakiel. The red tokens indicate, or the orange acrylic tokens indicate bombs, and the green ones indicate mates. So that's a Nikul with a mate. I will never kill it the entire game. So this is our first turn shot, and my instinct is to try and step on the gas as hard as I can, but it is always going to be difficult to do that against Toha. Pushing through the Symbiomates is really, really difficult. So what I end up deciding to do is to attempt to use smoke shooting with Yara Haddad to pick off as much as I can without engaging Symbiomate pieces. So what happens is we've got some Impetuous with McMurrough, we've got Impetuous with the Ghazi. There's a bit of skirmishing with the Libertos. The Libertos actually risks a Discover Shoot from McMurrough and gets dropped to Dogged, but then I have to just do nothing with McMurrough for the rest of the turn, because he'll just get shot by the Libertos and it's not worth risking. What mainly happens, though, is that this Metalia gets some smoke down, and we end up with smoke not underneath this bridge, but kind of in this position here, so it's pretty much cutting off most of the bridge. We then move this Link team up onto this rooftop. The Asawira actually takes the face-to-face roll with the Diplomatic Delegate, because the Asawira has BTS 9, that's good range band for a rifle. It takes like 2 or 3 orders to put her down, which is a real pain, but I do get her down. And then Yara moves up onto the bridge. Now from here, she can see and kill Janstar, who is exposed and not in cover, takes him out fairly easily. And then she can shoot down both of these Kael'tars and the Biker. Now it takes a lot of doing. Those are all of the kills that I get this turn. The Kael'tar in particular are just like, they're just firing flash pulses and making saves. And although her rifle is, her marksman rifle is armor piercing, it's obviously only damage 13. So a lot of saves get made by those Armor 1 Kael'tar. But I do eventually put both of them down and the Biker, which is, between that and the Delegate, that's 5 kills from a 16-trooper army on the first turn. That's pretty okay. That's pretty good, but 6 kills, sorry, I also killed the Libertos. What I've killed, though, is basically, with the exception of Janstar, it's all of his cheapest stuff. So the order pool is diminished, but the strength of the list is still kind of there. He spends some command tokens to consolidate groups, which I think is quite wise. The only other things to note, actually, Metalia. This is a bit of a showcase in Metalia orders. This Metalia Impetuous is to here, and then as it's a regular order, it climbs in this window. That's out of line of fire of the Nikul, and it will spend the rest of the game slowly moving forward to here to extend a jammer area over the midfield. Similarly, this Metalia, it can't initially Impetuous, but once smoke gets down from McMurrough and from this Ghazi, it can move up to here, and then it can irregular up to there, and that it's now extending a jammer area around there, which means that any attack on my Asawira is going to be a real pain. It'll eventually end up skirmishing with and kill some McCalls, and I don't think it dies the entire game. But pushing those jammer areas forward, just using the irregular orders of the Mutts in Second Combat Group, feels really good. It reminds me of like the good times of N3 Metalia. Jammers are still excellent. Jammers that are whip 15 are especially excellent. I've gotten lots of work out of them. You really don't need to worry too much about them being disposable. Top stuff. So my opponent consolidates, and what he does this turn is basically he pulls this Link team back over here. Yara Haddad has had to end up standing and she's in a link. There is a shootout with the Sukhwale HMG, which puts her down. Even though it's out of cover, she's on 2 dice 16s, it is 5 dice 13s. It hits her, it knocks her unconscious. And basically what happens is that then he's formed up a link with the lieutenant, and he moves that link up this direction. And what he does is he ends up moving out, splitting, and pulling some things back. But what he's doing here is he's fleeing the lieutenant forward. It'll eventually move around to there, but he gets to Ferroware attack my link. So this is the Tohaa thing. This is the like deeply annoying Tohaa Ferroware assault. And that Ferroware assault puts down the Ghulam NCO. The Bereed is safe, and then there's... I think it actually only kills the Ghulam NCO, but there's just a lot of like reset, dodge, reset, reset. Eventually, Mara actually is in danger as well. And so I end up in a situation where I dodge with the Asawira just to get some overwatch. It's a messy fight. The casualties are not too bad. I think my opponent needed to pull back 1 order earlier than he did. So that it's not crippling, but that link is basically gone at this point. Yara's unconscious. The Ghulam is down. The Asawira, I think, ends up like going unconscious and then next turn it takes a fight. It like doctors Yara, she gets back up, but it goes unconscious, then it dies trying to regenerate. That sort of puts an end. Yara will end up standing, and I try to do some more things with her over the course of the game, but that kind of puts an end. This attack puts an end to that rooftop assault. So here's the state of play. This is actually kind of like mid-turn 2. But what we can see here, Yara Haddad is now prone on this rooftop. The Asawira is dead, having taken some shootouts and died trying to regenerate. And then the NCO Ghulam, who was here, is dead. McMurray's pulled back to this position. But what has happened? What has happened to set this up? Okay, so we've had some more face-to-face rolls. The Sukiel is hanging out down there. Basically, I have had to try to make some scenario ground. So Pandora has left her position here and moved up to there. Pressed the button and just chilled out. Along the way, she's laid a picture. I think this Bereed missed twice trying to do that. She's laid a picture, and she has spent pretty much the entire turn trying to missile down the Takwheel lieutenant. That has been almost the entire of this turn, but she has succeeded. It took 2 Bereed attempts and Pandora to make that picture roll, so thank God I had a second picture in that part of the battlefield, because this Bereed over here was never going to make that distance. So Pandora's picture ended up being massive here. And that the Takwheel kill has put me in a turn of basic safety because my opponent is in loss of lieutenant. Now, I'm just going to spend a moment talking about a tactic that my opponent used here in dealing with missile strikes, and it's just the option to reset. A Takwheel has 2 wounds and regeneration, and is whip 14. It can, not always, but reasonably often survive a missile strike, or at worst go unconscious and then hopefully regenerate back half of the time. What it can't do is survive multiple missile strikes, because it will usually lose at least its symbiote armor, transmute, and then be very low armor against the follow-ups. As a result, basically whenever a missile attack is launched on this Takwheel, and I've played this multiple times, my opponent resets rather than dodges, and it always pays off for him. In this game, what we saw was Pandora, the Bereed attempted to lay a picture twice, failed, Pandora moved up, laid a picture, spotlit on the second attempt, missile strike, and he resets against the missile attack. The missile attack in this case did 1 wound to him, which is a bit of a pain, but not that weird, and he succeeded the reset, which meant that Pandora then had to try and spotlight him again in order to line the missile up and fire the shot that killed him. This took a missile attack from taking like most of my turn to taking basically all of my turn. I have no overwatch, nothing is in place. The only scenario ground I've made is from Pandora moving forward and pressing that button while she was going. She's in the midfield there and she's exposed, but fortunately she's very tough and this turn lost her lieutenant, so I'm not too worried about her dying. But it's just kind of a good use case. Always remember that you can reset in response to a missile attack, because you can reset anytime you have a valid ARO, and you have a valid ARO against a missile attack because it's a template which would let you dodge. So my opponent kind of does their best on the last turn, their second turn, loss of lieutenant, and I spend my entire last turn pushing forward onto scenario. So we have to make some cautious moves with this link, and that doctor's getting left behind. But the Asawira and team move out this way, and then there's some prone movements around this way. The Bereed ends up sitting in that nook, having pressed the button, and the Asawira gets onto this button here. There's a very brief shootout with a Sakiel that doesn't do any wounds. And I get through, get past, and then I stand up Yara and I coordinate suppressive fire. The only orders that I've got left in the turn are spent basically having McMurrough run forward, tank a K1 shot, guts this direction, move to there, and then net undermine to have done my classified. I don't have the orders to do much more, but I am sitting on all three buttons. I have both side buttons pressed, and then I coordinate into suppressive with Yara standing up. So I also, as part of that coordinated order, pop this Fide into suppressive. That is the only thing that a Fide will do all game, is drop into suppressive, but it matters. It actually does something. So my opponent has one last turn to make the push, and this is where I'm expecting Eclipsos to appear. And this is why I have gone hell for leather to press every button, sit on every button, do everything that I can, cover every button, because I don't want Eclipsos to swing the game from a win to a loss. I want to have 10 points in the bag that might go down to 7. What actually happens is that a Gautasos lands, and it lands here. It actually pops down just behind these stairs, and it starts moving around this direction. So the first thing that it does is that the Asawira initially is facing this way, towards my opponent's deployment zone. So it takes 2 shotgun shots at long range, needing 12s to hit with armor-piercing rounds. I don't have an ARO, so I don't have an ARO. He hits once, but I spang the roll, and then I use it's either warning or alert to change my facing, maintaining suppressive fire, so I can see him. At this point, he has to just go for it. He runs forward. I suppressive fire. He lays 2 shotgun templates over me. I hit him 3 times, but he passes 2 saves. He hits me twice with the templates, but I pass 1 save and take a wound. But the Ghazi Matawiya that is sitting up here jams him. At that point, he's still alive, but it does not matter. He is doing nothing else in this game. All my opponent has that can do anything is a Sakiel that is hanging out back here. That's a line infantry trooper, and it has to make a run. It has to make a run using the lieutenant order. It has very, very few orders, and it actually has to just it moves, it tries to drop Mirabel through a Symbiomate, it fails, and then it just has to yeet this direction, and it gets killed by the Fide and suppressive fire. So that locks the game out. My opponent, I think, had a really good end-turn run, but Ghazi Matawiya, the toughness of an Asawira, he needed to get lucky on that last turn, and he didn't. And so this game as well ended up 10-0. We'll go into the third round soon. The third round, as a reminder, will be a modified version of Unmasking, and I'll be playing against Vanilla Nomads. Stay tuned.